Hi, I'm Jane Sturmer, and I'm going to be doing a quick presentation on how to write your EBP paper. I've been an EBP paper editor for the last couple years, and I was also a nursing student at BTC back in the day. So I have a bit of an idea about what the teachers want and sort of some common mistakes that students tend to make when writing these things. So without further ado, here we go. The basic structure of an EBP paper is the title page, the introductory paragraph, the literature review, the discussion, the conclusion, and the references. I'm going to go through each section individually and sort of highlight some formatting things and content things that you might want to include. But be sure to check your teacher's rubric before you hand in your paper. Every teacher is a little bit different on what they want, and they usually are very specific in their rubric about what they're looking for. So just be sure you go through that before you hand it in to make sure you've got everything that particular teacher wants. So my first major piece of advice is before you start writing your paper, read all your studies. A lot of my classmates would either just read like the little abstract for each study, or they'd sort of choose a study that had the basic topic that they were looking for, but they wouldn't like read it. And so they'd start writing their paper about it and then get halfway through and realize that the study they chose doesn't fit the paper. It's either the wrong kind of study or it doesn't lend itself to comparison with the other studies they chose or whatever. Um, so I would highly recommend that when you start your paper, you have all of these questions I highlighted here written down for each study that you do. And it is a little bit of extra work up front, but it makes it so much easier to write your paper. I would often just sort of outline my paper by section before I'd ever start writing it. And that would take me, a good half an hour probably. But then the paper just kind of wrote itself after that because I had this really strong structure that I was working off of, and it made it so much more straightforward. A lot of students that I have talked to about their writing, they just they tend to get kind of like lost in the details, and they don't, they start writing a paragraph without knowing where it's going. And it's like if you have that outline ahead of time, it just keeps you so much more focused on what you're saying. So I highly, highly recommend you do that. So here is the title page in the new APA style. The running head is now gone. We have just the page number in the upper right corner. The title should be 3 to 4 double-spaced lines down, centered and bolded in Times New Roman 12-point font. The whole paper should be Times New Roman 12-point font. And then a space, and then your name. Next line is the program and the college, and then below that, the class you're taking, and then below that, your teacher and any relevant credentials. I didn't look up Holly's credentials for this, but you would have to do that. And then below there, just the due date. So then the introductory paragraph. A lot of introductory paragraphs I've seen have been way longer than I think they need to be. It should be pretty short. It should be like 1 to 2 paragraphs. You basically just want to introduce your topic, maybe have a line about why it's relevant to nursing, since this is a nursing EBP paper, and then introduce each study by author name and year, and briefly just state what they studied. If there's any like really technical background information that might be useful, I would include that here. But try to remember that your paper is targeted at academics, so they know, most things that you would have known going into this paper. If there's anything like, about like specific enzymes or something, maybe throw in a line about what that is. But you can generally assume that your audience knows what you're talking about. In the intro is where I see the most citation errors. A lot of people make really broad statements in their introductions about why their topic is important. They'll say things like, the American diet contributes to, a million different disorders, and then they don't cite it. And that's a mistake. Like, you have to cite statements like that. You can't just say things, even if they're common knowledge. If it's a fact, like, you have to cite it. So like in that first sentence there on this paper, I included a citation for that fact just because I wanted to include some sense of the scope of the problem of sleep debt, but I didn't want to like say something without citing it. So I found a citation that would support that statement. Um, if you want, you can have a really pared down introduction without a whole lot of background factual information if you don't want to look up extra citations, which is valid. But you just be careful about what you say in this section. And then be sure that you cite each author and the year. Don't say like the first study that I reviewed or the second study that I reviewed. Like use the names. Anytime you reference a study, just do it by author name. The next section after that is the literature review. This is the section where you're going to be describing each study and sort of what they learned. So you're going to have a centered bolded heading like on this last slide here. You can see it halfway down the page. And then you're going to have just like a paragraph or two about sort of what the authors were, what the question they were answering was, and what like what their sample population was, what the methods they used were, and any like problems they encountered, any obstacles, and then just sort of what the results were. What did they discover? You don't need to list every single thing the researchers did. You don't need to list, how they computed their results unless you think that it, is a flawed method that you want to critique later. You just need to provide enough information so that the reader knows basically what was studied and what they found. And then after you go through all of the different studies separately in the literature review section, then you want to discuss how they compare with each other. This is not the results section, by the way. You really want to talk about the results with the section in the literature review, because if you leave the results to the discussion section, the reader isn't even going to remember what the structure of the study was by the time you get there, because they've heard about 3 different studies by then. So just keep the results with the discussion of the study in the beginning, and then when you get to the discussion, compare how their results related. Sometimes they might support each other, sometimes they might disagree with one another. Just really delve into what you can safely extrapolate based on each study. And feel free to talk about like weaknesses that you find in the studies. Sometimes you do a whole separate section called the limitations of these studies, where you just talk about that, and that'll be on the next slide. Again, be sure you refer to the studies by author name and year, not by first study and second study. It's more typing, but it is so sloppy to just call them the first study, and it would be frowned upon in academia. So the limitations section, this is what it should look like. It is a subheading, so it won't be centered. It'll just be bolded. And in this section, you're going to talk about things that you think are weak about the study. So things like having a really small sample population, or only studying like one demographic, like, college students, or just women, or just doctors, like something like that. Or, having it be really culturally specific, like, if the study was only conducted on Americans, or if it was, like, just really, culturally specific, or, if the data is self-reported, that can be kind of weak because, people tend to view themselves in the best light. And so they'll say things like, yeah, I totally follow this diet every single day, when you don't really know that that's true. Or if it's really subjective data, like in this, one of the papers I reviewed in this was very subjective, where it was talking about the nurses rating sleep as helpful or not. And it's like, well, what does helpful mean? Like, that's kind of a weak metric. So criticisms like that should be included in this section. And then if there's like one limitation that you really want to hammer down on, you can make another subheading underneath the limitations heading. So I did that here with the demographic limitations, where I just italicized it and bolded it. And then when you get to your conclusion, you're going to have a centered bolded heading. You can keep it kind of short, just sort of restate what you think the overall findings of these studies together are. Maybe throw in a little bit about sort of what this implies for nursing and how this can be useful for nurses. And then if there's anything else that you think needs some research, you can call that out specifically. So references. References can be kind of stressful for people. I highly recommend that you don't use citation generators, or if you do, you at least edit what they give you, because the stuff that they give you is often wrong. They always seem to capitalize the wrong things, which is kind of weird. I don't know why they do that. Maybe their algorithms can't figure out what a title is for an article versus a journal, but I don't know. There almost always is something wrong with it. So I sort of laid out the general format of a reference in the top bit here. I didn't have it in the hanging indent fashion because PowerPoint apparently is bad at that. But you can just see sort of the basic components of a reference there. And then below it, I have an example reference so that you can kind of, look at how they compare to each other. And then here is your reference page. So the title should be centered and bolded. The authors should be listed alphabetically. And then after that, you have the year, and then you have the article title, and then the journal title, the journal volume, and then the issue, the pages, and the DOI. And I tried to pair the text describing the thing with the text box I put around the part that I'm discussing, if that's not clear. So article titles shouldn't be capitalized. I drew a little blue box around that. Journal titles should be capitalized and italicized. I drew a little green box around that. Weirdly, the journal volume is italicized, but the issue number is not. So you have this, that's in the purple box. You have this little unit where half of it is italicized and half of it isn't. I don't know why they did it that way. It's weird, but that's how it is. And then the DOI, which is a new thing that the new APA is encouraging. I think it's not required, but you can. I recommend including it because it's a really easy way to find your study. Also, you can include the hyperlink, the sort of the blue text with the underline, so you can just click it and go there. I tend to not, just because I don't like how that looks aesthetically. But you can do that. It's actually probably better, but I didn't here. And then making a hanging reference. I've seen some students try to do it with spaces, and then anytime they edit anything else in their paper, it totally destroys it. Just format it correctly. It's not that hard. Highlight your reference, click on the little paragraph box, and then select hanging under the special indentation options, and then hit OK, and then it just fixes it. It's really easy once you know how to do it. Yeah, so that's the basics on how to write your EBP paper. If you have any more questions or concerns, just contact your EBP writing tutor. They're really knowledgeable about this stuff, and they can help you do a final scan before you send it into your teacher. So good luck.